The Panasonic Lumix S5 came out in 2020. We reviewed it back then, we liked it, it's a great hybrid camera. But what is it like in 2022? How does it hold up? A lot of cameras have come out since then, things in the market have changed, but this camera hasn't sat still either. So should you be looking at the S5 in 2022?
So in terms of specs, the S5 holds up pretty well, to be honest. 24.2 megapixel sensor, 4K video, 30p, 4K 60 with a bit of a crop, continuous shooting burst mode where you've got 30 frames a second bursts with 6K images, and then 60 frames a second bursts with 4K quality images. It had improved autofocus, which I think was an important thing for Panasonic at the time. Image stabilization up to 6.5 stops, which is great, to be honest, especially for a hybrid system like this, and much improved low light capabilities with dual native ISO. So certainly no slouch, and as a hybrid camera, it was able to fill in for photography and video very well in both categories, which is really, really useful. But importantly, the camera is not the same as it was in 2020. That's where the firmware updates come in. So there's been a number of firmware updates that have come out, patching things in the camera, improving things like autofocus a little bit as well. But the most notable one added Blackmagic RAW. So that's RAW video up to 5.9K. And that really adds a lot to this camera. It really takes it up a notch in terms of professional videography and allows you to do a huge amount with this camera.
Now, it's fair to say there's a lot of competition to this camera. A lot of cameras have come out since this was originally released in 2020, and there's a lot to think about when you're looking at a new camera in 2022. But a few things really stick out with this camera. Obviously, we talked about the updates. That really keeps it relevant in 2022, and it really means this is offering a huge amount, especially if you're a videographer of any kind. Even if you're a hybrid shooter, this is offering so much in video, it's difficult to ignore it. And then there's also the price. The price point of this camera really makes it extremely competitive in 2022. And that's something you really have to take into account when you're looking at a new camera.
So in terms of photography, obviously you've got that 24 megapixel sensor, that's pretty sort of standard, improved autofocus over previous cameras, but videography is where this really shines. It's a real powerhouse for videography, and some people might find that even a little bit surprising considering the price of this camera, especially when it came out. You know, sitting, I guess, on paper below things like the S1, the S1R, the S1H, but actually it really is able to hold its own. Like I mentioned earlier, 4K 30, 4K 60 with a crop, but because of those firmware updates, you've got that Blackmagic RAW in there. 5.9K RAW. That's really impressive for a camera like this. And then you've got really nice slow motion in full HD as well. And all of that is 10-bit, so you've really got the ability to color grade this stuff in whatever way you'd like. You've got a lot of information there to play around with. You've even got Vlog actually pre-installed on the camera. So there really is a lot here that even now in 2022 really does stand up as a very current camera. The technology is very, very up to date. You know, we don't see things like the 4K 120, but at this price point, you wouldn't really expect to, not on a full frame camera like this. And this is why this really does hold up in 2022. Now, I've mentioned autofocus a few times within this video, but I think it would be remiss of me not to bring it up properly, because autofocus is certainly a subject that is spoken about with Panasonic cameras, and that's no different here. Now, when the S5 launched, it had an improved autofocus system. That's been even further improved through firmware updates as well. And I've got to say, it's probably better than you think. It works really quite well, especially for video. I was actually using it quite a bit. I do like to use a bit of manual focus as well these days with video, but you can absolutely use that autofocus. The same goes for photography as well. Autofocus, and especially in this case, it's a tool to do a job, much like the camera is a tool to do a job. And as long as you know how to use that tool, you're going to get good results. It's not the best autofocus system out there. I don't think that's a particularly hot take. You know, there are better autofocus systems. It's not the camera's strongest point, but it's definitely improved and it's definitely usable. Now, manual focus, especially for video, is a good skill to have because a lot of productions will want to use manual focus or will use lenses that only have manual focus. So I think it's always a good skill to have, but that autofocus, especially for video, it's a good backup. And actually for me, I was using it quite a lot with pretty good results, I would say.
Feel-wise, ergonomics-wise, it's small, it's lightweight, and you can really do a lot with this. You can either keep it small like this, right? So have it as a run and gun system, pair it with something like the 50mm f1.8, a great setup. But you can also build this out as a nice big rig. Now it's got a really comfortable grip. The buttons are all in kind of ergonomic, makes sense kind of places. And I really like the flip out screen as well. But it's so easy to build this out into a larger system if that's the kind of thing you want to do. So it's really up to you how you would want this to look for your setup. If you're a hybrid run and gun shooter, maybe keep it as it is. If you're doing commercial shoots on maybe a bigger production, you can build this out into a much bigger rig. The choice really is up to you.
So let's answer the question. Should you be looking at the S5 in 2022? Well, I think the answer is yes. Definitely, because this is now an extremely attractive price point for what is a very capable hybrid camera. And even if you're just looking at this for video, it is super, super powerful. There's a lot it can do. It's almost surprisingly powerful, to be honest. 5.9K RAW, 4K up to 60 frames a second. You got really nice slow motion, full HD. The photography is no slouch either. There's a lot going for this camera and at a price point that is very, very attractive in this market. So yes, I absolutely think the S5 not only stands up in 2022 as a great camera, it still feels reasonably future-proofed with a lot of the technology. You're not going to be buying old technology. It feels current, which I think is really important. Now, if you want to check out the S5 for yourself, we've got a link down in the description so you can check out the full spec, the pricing, all that kind of stuff. There's also the 50mm f1.8 down there, which is the lens we've been using with the camera, so you can go check all of that stuff out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because we've got new content all the time, reviews, tutorials, loads of stuff. I'll be seeing you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.